Welcome to the Love Deep Lab podcast, helping you integrate sex, sexiness, sacredness, and science in your life and your bedroom. And now, your host, Dr. Stormy.
Hi, Dr. Stormy here. Thank you for joining us today for this podcast. Today, we are going to talk about self-care and self-care as a practice. So for all of you out there listening and watching, I want you to know the reason I love this topic so much is because I used to suck at self-care. And I'm still in practice. Some days I do awesome in self-care. Other days I struggle with it. But I really think that everyone out there, this is for men and women alike, everyone out there, especially right now in our pandemic and merging from cocoon pandemic times, self-care is really taking a hit. Our society that promotes productivity and is so accomplishment oriented and social media and data driven and quick and, and stimulating all of our ADHD tendencies does not really promote or teach us the art of self-care. So I love this subject. I work with all of my clients on self-care and what does that look like? So we're going to really get into that today. And I'm so excited for this episode with you today. And actually, I have a tattoo on my left shoulder that says sacred selfishness. It's one of my most provocative tattoos. I have many, but the reason I had that put on my body, adorned my body with that, this is probably like 7 or 8 years ago now, was because I was struggling with self-care. I had been a single mom for so long. I, run 3 businesses, and I really found that I was crappy at self-care and I was paying the price for it. And so for me, the journey over the last 7 or 8 years has been to be impeccable in my self-care. And like I said, it's a practice. Some weeks I'm impeccable and other weeks I sort of stink at it. But I want to welcome you into thinking of self-care as a practice. So let's start with the definition of self-care. So I like this one. It's the act of engaging in activities to maintain or improve optimal health. And here's the part I like the most, particularly during times of stress. You'll notice the definition doesn't say, I do self-care when things are great, and when I'm stressed, that self-care falls by the wayside, which I think so many of us can relate to, myself included. But the definition, and this I love the focus, is on particularly in times of stress. So right now, when we all have maybe more stresses in life or different stresses in life, and we just celebrated Rosh Hashanah. I was with my brother and my sister-in-law who are Jewish, and I got to celebrate the New Year with them. So for all you out there who celebrate, Happy New Year to you. But I love the idea of looking at our life and starting anew in this new year. So maybe I invite you, whether you are Jewish or not, whether you practice or not, to invite in a new practice of self-care. Another definition of self-care that I love is self-care is feeding the very center of yourself. Self-care is feeding the very center of yourself. So why do you want to practice self-care? Why does it even matter? Well, so many reasons. When we practice good self-care, we have a more joyful, happy life. We experience more joy, we experience more bliss, we experience more pleasure. So I am a total self-care cheerleader for myself and for all of you out there listening or watching. But it's also, it reduces stress, and we know that there's so much stress right now in life. And so it's a really great way to reduce stress. It improves our immune function. There's lots of studies and research that show that we live longer if we do better self-care, and cultures and communities that do better, that really promote self-care, have longer longevity. There's also increased happiness. And ironically, one of the reasons that self-care often will fall by the wayside for people is they'll say, I'm too busy, or life is too stressful, or my to-do list is too long, or the kids need me, or kids are sick, or, the list goes on and on. You can add in your own list. But the interesting thing is, so we do it because we don't feel like we have time for self-care. But the research is pretty amazing to show we're more productive when we put self-care as a priority. So I just think that's super fascinating. So if you find yourself saying, I don't have time for it, or I'm too busy, really check that, because you will actually be more productive and get more done if you put self-care as a priority. And another reason is that if we don't practice self-care, we have so many roles that we wear and so much asked of us. There's so many different needs and wants of, maybe it's family, maybe it's partners, maybe it's friends, maybe it's children, whatever it might be for you. But we get pulled in so many directions. And that can really, if we're not nourishing ourselves, we can really start to feel bitterness and resentment. And that shows up in all areas of our life. So improving your self-care will help to work and to mitigate, to keep from happening bitterness and resentment in your life. And one way I really love to look at self-care is we can give. Most of us, all of us, have incredible depths of spirit and incredible resilience. And we can give from a place of lack. We can give from a place of exhaustion. We can give from a place of depletion. And we really can. We can kind of dig in and find the grit, and often we can give from there. But this is encouraging you. I am encouraging you to give from a place of fullness, to give from a place of overflow. And one of the ways we fill our cup to have that full cup that can overflow is with self-care. And there are actually 8 kinds of self-care. And you might not believe that, but there really are. And so as I read through them, one of the things you're going to do for your sexy homework this week is to think about how are you doing in self-care in each of these 8 areas. And again, as always, I say to approach it with curiosity and non-judgment, just in your quiet time or on your Peloton or out walking or whatever it might be. Think of these 8 areas and check yourself. How do I do in these areas? Because you will probably find, I certainly find, that I'm really good in some areas and I'm lacking in others. And that kind of can point me in the direction of my growth, the direction of my practice. Maybe that's the area that I implement this week, an improvement in self-care. So the 8 areas of self-care are physical, psychological, emotional, social, professional, environmental, spiritual, and financial. So just check yourself in that. Let those kind of land and just be curious about how you do in each of those areas. And there's another thing I like about self-care is that we can think of it's this big commitment. Well, no, if you actually want to really improve your self-care, you're going to start with small things that are logistically sustainable, that are financially sustainable, that are all the ways sustainable that you can start practicing this week and maybe even today. So you can think of self-care that there's things that you do continuously, often. Maybe it's once a week, maybe it's 3 times a week, maybe it's daily. And then there's these little kind of one-offs, right? And people will think, oh, it has to be this big, expensive, time-consuming practice. And those are great when you can do those and when life allows and affords the time and the finances and things like that. But we're talking about the daily or weekly or 3 times weekly practices that don't cost a lot of money. They don't take a lot of time. They nourish your soul and your spirit and your body in some way. So for me, one of the ways I like to kind of to think about, to map out, maybe that's my left brain dominant, but I map out my self-care is I like to think of it in 4 areas for me. So one is like exercise and health. Okay. And what would that look like for you? How is your exercise routine? Does it nourish your body? Is it like you just like, I have to do it because of X, Y, or Z, or is it something that brings you joy? And if not, can you add in a different form of exercise or a different form of movement, a different form of healthy practices that does bring you joy? Because self-care, again, is about nourishing your center, nourishing your soul. So I like to think of it as an exercise / health, diet. And that doesn't mean dieting. It means, what am I putting in my body? Is it nourishing my body? How am I taking care of my body? Do I need to adjust or change that? Are there small ways that I can change what I eat, what I put into my body, what I drink, to more deeply nourish my soul, my spirit, and my body? And the third area I like to think of as my solitude practices. For me, time alone, like I mentioned, I'm a single mom. I run these businesses. I adore my clients. I have the best friends on the planet, in my opinion. But time alone, solitude, time for quiet, time for reflection is super important to me. And it's a really incredible area to look at as far as your self-care practices. And then the 4th area, which none of you listening will be surprised because we talk about pleasure a lot on the Love Deep Lab podcast, but how is your pleasure practices? And again, this doesn't necessarily mean sexual pleasure. It certainly can mean, but how do you nourish? Is pleasure a part of your self-practice? So again, that can be anything, what you eat, the sun on your face, your movement, laughter, touching yourself, having a massage. It can be anything that brings you pleasure. So checking in on your pleasure as an area of self-care. And now for your sexy homework, I'm going to give you 5 tips that I think are amazing in helping you ramp up, make more robust, and commit to your self-care practice. So I'm going to go through the 5, and then your sexy homework is to try one or two or all 5 of these practices this week. Honor yourself. So here's another little kind of segue, is that self-care is not optional. Self-care is not a luxury. Self-care does not come at the end of your to-do list. This is about putting self-care at the very top of your to-do list as a priority, as an essential part of your care for yourself. So the first tip is, what does self-care mean to you? We just talked about those kind of 8 kinds of self-care and these 4 different areas of self-care. So check in. What would self-care look like and mean to you? And you can take into account logistics and kids and finances and all the things, but really getting clear, because if you have 20 people in a room, you have 20 different versions of self-care. So what does self-care mean to you? And what would it look like? That's the first tip. Second tip is to incorporate one behavior this week. One behavior, one thing that you come up with from that list that you just did, and to do it. So we start small, because if we start big, we don't take that first step. So we start small. So today, think of one thing that you can do to care for your center, to care for your soul, your body, and your spirit. The third tip is to schedule self-care. And again, that's kind of back to that, like, not at the bottom of the to-do list, but the very top of the to-do list. Every day when I do to-do lists, in there is my self-care. That might be exercise, that might be time with a friend, that might be both, whatever it is, to literally schedule in your self-care. The fourth tip is to learn the magic word of no. No is so powerful. And I really connect with this one, as you can tell, because I am a people pleaser in recovery, codependent in recovery as well. But I had such a hard time saying no. And now I love and honor my no, because my no, if I'm clear with my no, then I'm really clear with my yes. So checking in with yourself. Let's say you get invited to something and you're kind of going out of obligation, or because you feel like you need to, but your body, your wisdom, your best and quietest self says, gosh, I would much rather stay home tonight and watch a movie or read a book or take a bath. So honoring that voice, honoring your no, will also allow you to more deeply feel your yes. And then the fifth tip is I love this one. This is like the mindfulness one. So to reflect on how you feel. So we will only commit to this practice of self-care if we notice that we are better when we do. We are our best versions of ourselves, for our partners, for our kids, for our family, for our colleagues, when we take care of ourselves, when we're giving from that full cup. But you have to pause and reflect on, maybe, let's say on a day you did really great self-care. Notice how you are throughout your day, at the end of the day, as you fall asleep, compared to maybe a day where you didn't prioritize self-care, you didn't rock it in self-care. And how did you feel then? Because for me, I notice that I do my best and am my best when I take care of myself. And again, day by day, that will look differently, but the priority and the practice is there. So those are 5 simple tips to practice better self-care. And I just think it's so important. So I want to close today with a quote that I love about self-care. There are days I drop words of comfort on myself like falling leaves, and remember that it is enough to be taken care of by myself. That's by Brian Andreas, and I love his work. But that's a great quote about self-care. So taking care of yourself, loving on yourself, prioritizing yourself will bring you a more joyful, happy, overflowing, abundant life. And I want that for everyone out there listening or watching. So thank you for being brave. Thank you for listening. And thank you for opening your hearts to love